We're going to be in Exodus chapter number 33 this morning. Exodus 33. This one again. Exodus 33. The first time that I was ever asked to speak anywhere, my dad came to me and he said, "Larry, there's a church up in San Jose that wants you to speak at a conference they're having." San Jose is up in the Bay Area. It's where I was born. It's about 5 hours north by car from where I live. And my dad, he gets asked to speak all the time. He's been to your church here in Australia. He's really, God's used him all over the world. And so he gets speaking requests all the time. In fact, he can't even say yes to all the speaking requests that my dad gets. Me, not so much, a little bit different. And my dad came to me, this is about 10, 12 years ago. My dad came to me and he said, "Larry, there's a church that wants you to speak for them." And I was kind of intrigued by that because no one had ever asked me to speak anywhere on anything. And I was intrigued and I was kind of nervous by it. And my dad told me, he said, "They want you to speak at that church because your great-grandfather spoke at this church one time. He was a farmer from Colorado, but he spoke at this church one time. And he says, then your granddad spoke here once. And then he said, your mom and I," so my dad and my mom, "got married in this church." And he says, there's a little bit of family history. That's why they want you there. Because of all the family history, there's been 4 generations of Chappells that have spoken at this church. And they thought it would be really cool to have you come and speak at the church. And I thought that kind of sounded cool too. I was super nervous. I don't remember what I preached on or what message I prepared, but I worked on it. And I remember driving up to the Bay Area. I think Ashley was with me. And we went up to this church. No, actually flew up, because what happened was when we got picked up at the airport, the guy that picked us up from the airport, the first thing he said was, "Man, we were really bummed when our guest preacher canceled on us, but we're glad that you were able to show up." And I was thinking, my dad didn't tell me any of that. He left out that little detail. He made it sound like they wanted me. He told me this whole story, like they want you. There's 4 generations of Chappells, and that's why they want you. But the truth of it was they just had a last minute cancellation, and they opted for me. This morning we're going to look at this moment in Israel's history where they really didn't want God. They were fine with him being there, kind of like that church was fine with me being there, but they didn't really want me. I just happened to be the guy that could fill in. Well, Israel had developed this same attitude towards God. They didn't really want God for who he was. They just kind of wanted him for his benefits and as the guy that would kind of just fill in. And it led to some catastrophic moments in the history of Israel. In Exodus 32, the chapter previous, there's a lot of the bad things that happen in that passage. We won't take the time to read through Exodus 32. But you've heard the story of the golden calf. Moses goes up in the mountains to get the tablets from God. And while he is away, Israel falls into idolatry. And it angers God. It was a low point in the history of Israel. And now that's where we find ourselves in Exodus 33. But there's this brilliant moment in Exodus 33 that I really want to hone in on. So we're gonna look at the background that led up to this moment. But just to begin, let's read in verse number 17, Exodus 30 and 17. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. If you see those verses, those words in verse number 18, those 4 words at the end of the verse, show me thy glory. If you found your spot there, let's read those together. Show me thy glory. All right, one more time, but say it like you're awake. Show me thy glory. So let's talk about what led up to this. First thing that we see in verse number 1, there is this disturbing realization. We read in verse number 1, And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thee, unto thy seed will I give it, and I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. So the first thing that God tells Moses here in verse numbers 1 and 2 is, Depart, go up hence, get the people that I brought out of Egypt, go into the land, I'm going to give it to you. So everything here checks out okay, this is good. Remember, God has called his people out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. They're now into the wilderness. They're at this critical moment in their history. And God, and they've got this hiccup. It's not just a little hiccup, it's a big hiccup, a big sin because of the golden calf. But now God instructs Moses, get your people, get everyone together, go into the land that I promised you. You're going to drive out I'll send an angel, we're going to drive out all of the enemies. But then we come to verse number 3. Look what verse number 3 says. Unto a land flowing with milk and honey. So that checks out, that's good. And then it says, For I will not go up in the midst of thee. For thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. Guys, this is a passage that should sober us. Did you catch what just happened? God tells Moses after their great sin, he says, Moses, get all the people together. You guys are going. You're going to the land that I promised you. I'm going to send an angel to drive everyone out of the land. He's going to fight with you. But I'm not going. I'm not going. I like to tease my girls, my 3 daughters. I showed you the picture last night. One of the ways I tease them at our church campus, we have a few different elevators in some of our buildings that have multiple floors. And for the elevators, the lifts, the girls will sometimes get in. They always fight, the little girls, my little girls, over who's going to push the button. They all want to be the ones to push the button in the elevator. But sometimes I tease my daughters. And I remember one time my oldest daughter, Layton, when she was younger, when she was like 3 or 4 years old, she'd run into the elevator to push the buttons. And as soon as the doors are starting to close, I would just like jump out of the elevator. And she'd be like, oh, no, as the door is like closing. It would freak her out completely because she thought she was going to be in there alone. This is the type of moment that Israel's having. Because God tells them, you're going to go in the promised land. They've heard this dozens and hundreds of times. This was the whole purpose of their existence. They were God's chosen people for a chosen land. They were supposed to move in that direction. They understood the marching orders. What was new to them today was God saying, I am not going with you. Not going to happen. You know, we just came through Christmas. And at Christmas we celebrate God with us. And we think of the good tidings. Sometimes we sing good tidings of great joy. Look at verse number 4. And when the people heard all these evil tidings, this is the opposite of Christmas. At Christmas we celebrate God with us. In Exodus 33 they are mourning because God was going to leave them. These evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on his ornaments. This withdrawal, why would God do this to them? Look at verse number 5. And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto the children of Israel, Ye are a stiff-necked people. I will come up in the midst of thee in a moment and consume me. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. And the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. These verses are meant to sober us. You see, God was their protector. God was their peace. God was their provision. Without him, they had no purpose. He was their friend. He was their rest. And now he was going to be gone. What a sobering reality. Here's what God says to Moses. Moses, I'm going to send you guys alone because if I went up in the midst of you, I would consume you in an instant because you are that wicked and I am that holy. This isn't going to work. You know, if we're not careful, we could demand mercy as if it's something we deserve. But honestly, all that any of us deserve is God's wrath because of our wickedness. is only because of his grace and his love for us and the payment of Jesus Christ that we can enter into his relationship with him. But what we deserve on our own is we deserve an eternity in hell. And apart from Christ, you will get what you deserve, an eternity in hell. That's a sobering thought. So this is a stressful, distressing moment for the children of Israel. This should also sober us. Maybe 3 years ago, I was driving back to Colorado. My family originally is from Colorado, and Colorado is a beautiful state in America. There's a lot of farming, a lot of mountains. They get some colder weather than we usually get in California. But we were driving back to Colorado. My dad was back in Colorado, and he was back there already with some family. And so we had planned a trip, and this trip was going to take place in November in the United States. It's kind of a colder month where winter is just setting in. And so we had rented a truck to help drive to Colorado. We were taking some supplies, and it was me, my brother-in-law, and my brother. And we were about 4 hours outside of Lancaster where we live. And we had checked the weather report, and we had known that there was going to be a little bit of snow or a little bit of ice on the road. And we're traveling. We had just stopped for some coffee, and we got back on the road, and we're driving, and we're watching the temperature drop on the thermometer. And I started to see some ice form on our windshield. And I remember talking to my brother and my brother-in-law and telling them, I think it might snow earlier than we thought. And just like that, we came up over the hill, and there was just a sheet of ice on the road. We were traveling about 60 miles per hour. I don't know what that translates to in kilometers, but it was a pretty good clip. We were traveling at, and all of a sudden, just like that, just ice. And I felt the truck start to lose traction. Now, I'm driving the truck, and I feel the truck just to start go towards the side of the road, and there was nothing I could do about it. And I remember just like praying, like, God, keep us safe. And just like that, the tires of our truck hit the edge of the road, and the truck flipped. Not once, not twice, but 3 times we flipped. I remember there's oncoming traffic coming this way, and here we are on the highway at night. It's snowing now. There's ice on the road, and I'm in this truck, and it's just flipping towards oncoming traffic. I remember seeing the headlights. I remember like all the windows and the airbags going off and crashing around us, and it was a scary moment. When the truck came to a stop, we all looked around, and the short story of it was none of us were hurt. It was pretty amazing. Like no one had a broken bone. The truck slowed to a stop, even though we rolled many times. We never hit anything. The truck was completely totaled. The temperatures were well below freezing. We had to wait some time for this tow truck driver. But I remember calling my wife and letting her know that we were okay. I remember calling my dad and telling my dad, hey, we're not going to be able to make it to Colorado. We just got in an accident. I said, we're all fine. No one got hurt, but it was a bad accident. You know, the car is totaled. We've got to sort some things out. And I remember my dad telling me, oh, Larry, I'm going to send someone from our church staff. They're going to pick you up, and then you can finish your trip to Colorado. And I talked to my brother and I talked to my brother-in-law, and none of us wanted to continue the trip. And here's why. It was such a sobering moment. It was one of those moments where your life flashed before your eyes that I'm like, all any of us wanted to do was get back to our families. I just wanted to see Ashley. I just wanted to see my girls. Like it could have, like my life could have easily ended that night. I could show you pictures of it, of the accident. It was tragic. It was terrible. It could have been tragic. But what did that moment do? It sobered me. It gave me it put in perspective, guys, not to be too heavy on the last morning of camp, but these moments should sober us. This idea of continuing life without God, that should be a sobering reality. It was a jarring experience. Sometimes our approach to God can get stagnant. Paul said this, if Christ be not raised, your faith is in vain, and ye are yet in your sin. One of the girls last night just had this testimony, I think it might have been you, that said, I'm just thankful for God to let us do this. I thought that was such a good testimony. Sometimes we just take it for granted, like that we get to go to a camp. and that God is this good to us, and we get to be with our friends, we get to open His Word, and we have the assurance that we have a home in heaven. You take away God from the equation, we have none of that. And that's what Israel is experiencing right now. God says, go into the land, but I'm not going to be there. And this is scary. So we see this disturbing realization, but that's followed up by this desperate plea in verse number 5. In verse number 5, we read, "For the Lord has said unto Moses, say unto the people of Israel, ye are a stiff-necked people." We read this a moment ago. "I will come up in the midst of thee. I'll consume thee in a moment." And so here's what's going to happen next. They've got to see God clearly. They've clearly been stuck in a rut. They've been stuck in their sin. So how are things going to be put back on track? Number one, they've got to remove. Look at verse number 7. Verse number 7. And by the way, time out here. Maybe you'll jot these down. If you find yourself taking your Christian walk for granted, or stuck in a rut, or fallen into sin, what should you do? First of all, remove. Look at verse number 7. "And Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass, when Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood every man at his door and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle." So the verses we read very emphatically make the point that Moses sets up the tabernacle. This is the tent where they're going to meet God, but he sets up this tent way outside the city. He comes and sets up this tent outside the city, far from the city, far from the sin that took place amongst the people. This highlights two things. It highlights, first of all, the holiness of God. Listen, we cannot become comfortable in our sin. Moses was not comfortable to set up the tent in the sin. What he had to do is he had to remove himself. You want to see God clearly? Perhaps there's some things in your life that you need to remove, that you need to distance yourself from. Maybe that's a decision that can be made here this morning at camp. You've got good intentions, you've got good plans, maybe you've made some good decisions, but you haven't removed some things. Before, sometimes God will do an improving job. You've got to do a removing job. And so Moses, he removes himself from the congregation, from the people, from the city, and he sets up this tabernacle where they can meet with God, but outside and far from the sin. So this highlights the holiness of God. Listen, we cannot remain in our sin and be comfortable just approaching God. It doesn't work that way. And so he sets up this tabernacle, and this highlights the holiness of God, but also this highlights the grace of God, that God would meet with his people even in spite of their sin. No one has done something that is so wrong, so heinous, that you would find yourself so far from God that you could never come back to him. This highlights the grace of God, that God was willing to meet with his people. So he said, Moses removed. Then, what did he do next? Then Moses reminded. So remove, remind. Here's a pattern here. What do you do when you want to see God clearly? Remove. Remove the sin. Confess the sin. Get it out of your life. Make that right. Then remind. So Moses here, he's got a couple of reminders, and he reminds and rehearses the promises of God. Look at verse number 12. "And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight." This is an interesting moment. Moses is telling God, God, you can't do this. You can't leave us here. You can't send us out and your presence not go with us. And on what grounds can Moses say that? Moses says, God, you promised us. You said you were going to send us into the Holy Land, the promised land. You were going to give us a land. You told us all these promises. And so what Moses is doing is he's rehearsing the promises of God. Now, everyone look up here. I know it's morning, and you guys were up late last night, and I'll try to keep this moving. Why would we remind God, or why would Moses remind God? Why would he rehearse the promises of God? It was not that God had forgotten. It was that Moses needed to be reminded of them himself as well. God didn't forget. God doesn't make a promise and forget his promise like we can. We all have the potential to make a promise and forget a promise. God doesn't do that. What Moses is doing is Moses is God is not forgotten. God doesn't change. He doesn't change. That's part of his character. But Moses needed that. Listen, I think that's a good point for every single of us to make, to rehearse the promises of God in our life. In moments where we are disoriented, maybe disoriented of sin, remove the sin and just go straight back to the promises of God. The devil would love to throw up in your face things you've done in your past. Go back to the promises of God. That's what Moses is doing here. He's going back to the promises of God. And then he makes this request. Verse number 13. Now therefore, I pray thee, if I have found grace in my sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I might find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. This is a wonderful moment in Scripture. Moses says, show me your ways, God. Think about this. Here's what Moses is asking for. I want to know how you operate. I've had some good conversation. Ashley and I have had good conversations with many of you in this room. And we've asked questions like, how do you guys do this? Or how do you pronounce this? What's the Australian way? Do you guys do this or do you not do this? And it's intriguing to us. And every day we learn something new. Here's what's cool in this passage. Moses says, God, show me your ways. I want to know how you operate. I want to know who you are and what you're like. Now think about this. This is why this is so great. Think of what Moses has seen in his life. Moses has encountered God at the burning bush. He's spoken to God. He's experienced God. Moses goes to the Red Sea and puts his staff out and the waters are parted. And yet still, Moses says, I want to know more. I want to know more. Listen, this shows us the depth of the God that we serve and who created us and that we live for. That Moses could part the waters and free his people from bondage and be used in incredible ways. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of who God is. Paul talked in the New Testament about the unsearchable riches of Christ. This is one of the best parts of the Christian life, is that you never hit the bottom. You keep digging in the truth of God's word and you never find a dead end. You keep knowing and you keep growing. And here's Moses, who's experienced God in such an amazing way. Think about this. God revealed his name first to who? To Moses. He says, I'm Yahweh. He tells that to Moses first. So arguably, on the face of the earth at this time, Moses knew more about God than anyone else. And here's what Moses says, God, I want to know more. Do you have that appetite? See, camp ends here in a few moments. We'll pack up our things. We'll go home. But if you don't have this appetite of God, I want to know more, you're not going to know him in a deeper way. You're not going to come to every service, every activity with just a deeper desire and longing to know him more. Moses says, God, I want to know who you are. I want to know how you operate. I want to know you. Moses, he makes these petitions, these pleas. God, show me your way. In a minute, we're going to look at this second petition, this request he makes to God. God, I want to see your glory. Show me your glory. And that is commendable, but that's not the takeaway of this passage. The biggest takeaway of this passage is that you'll never tire or grow bored or know everything that there is to know about God. Keep on pursuing him, growing in the knowledge of him. There's 3 types of knowledge. Maybe you'll want to jot these down. First of all, there's awareness. Awareness. This is the simplest kind of knowledge. When you are aware that something exists. You know something because you just know you're aware. The second degree of knowledge is description, where you're not just aware, but you know about. I'll use an example this week. I was talking to some of you about different types of foods and restaurants, and some of you girls were talking about Raising Cane's, right? You had an awareness of Raising Cane's. That's a knowledge, right? And some of you even had more than just an awareness that, oh yeah, I know there's that restaurant called Raising Cane's. It's like a chicken restaurant in the States. It's got pretty good chicken. Some of you even knew some of the items on the menu. And so that's cool. So that's the first level of knowledge is just an awareness. I know it exists. The second level of knowledge is a description. I know it exists and I know it's on the menu. The deepest level of knowledge is experience. I know it exists, I know it's on the menu, and I've tasted it and it's good. I'm afraid that too many youth groups, I know for sure in America, they've got only an awareness knowledge of God and maybe a descriptive knowledge of God, but very few have an experiential knowledge of God. Where you know He exists, you know some facts about Him, but what I'm imploring you to do on this final morning of camp is to dive into the deep end and get to know your God and not be satisfied until you've experienced Him personally in your life. Not just the testimony of your parents or others in the room, but you have seen God work personally in your life. That is what Moses is pleading for. In the New Testament, Paul said that I may know Him and the power of His resurrection, the fellowship of His sufferings, being made conformable unto His death. So there's this removal, getting rid of the sin. There's this reminder, just reminding God of the promises. Not that God needed to be reminded of it, but we need to be reminded of it. And then He makes this request, God, I want to see your ways. So how does God respond? Look at verse 14. And He said, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. So God tells Moses, I'll go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest. By the way, rest is something spiritually that only God can give. Sleep seems to be elusive. You know, the sleep industry in the United States was a $400 billion industry. Rest is elusive. People are looking for rest, and not just physical rest, but rest for their souls. Only Jesus can offer rest for your souls. Only Jesus can make that guarantee. Maybe you're here today and you're restless. Your soul's restless. There's constant nagging and issues and frustration, and I mentioned last night maybe even anxiety or distress, and you're like, I'm not at ease. Jesus says, come unto me, you'll find rest. Rest for your souls. And this is what God tells Moses. Moses, I can sense you're disturbed by this reality of going into the promised land without me. So Moses, I'm going to go with you. My presence will go with thee. You have to note something here, though, that's happening. When God tells Moses, and when He responds here, Moses says, God, imploring you to go with us. You have to go with us, you know. God replies, I'll go with thee. But the thee is singular. He says, Moses, I'm going to go with you. I'll go with you, Moses, just you. How does Moses reply back to God? Verse number 15. And he said unto him, if thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. Like God, here's what He's saying. Think of what Moses is saying here. God has promised Moses the promised land, an angel that would accompany Moses and clear out all the enemies. The land would be Moses for the taking. But Moses says, if you're not going with me, I don't want to go. Now think of this. This is the central point of the message. It's worth asking ourselves, if heaven gave you everything you ever wanted, the job, the guy, the girl, the car, the health, the wealth, but Jesus wasn't there, would you be content there? Or if heaven gave you nothing but Jesus, would you be satisfied? That's the question to ask ourselves. Are you content going forward in life? If you won the lottery, or you got the dream job, you got the dream set up and everything was good, but Jesus wasn't there, are you content to go forward? Or if all you have in this life is Jesus, are you satisfied in Him? There's a mountain, there's a bridge not far from our house. It's about an hour away. And it's a beautiful bridge. It was built in 1936 in the San Gabriel Mountains. And This bridge it's a large bridge. It's a concrete bridge. There's a plaque on it that shows the year that it was constructed. But in the middle of construction of this bridge, this large bridge, there was a great flood. The LA River flooded over and really wiped out a lot of the canyons in the near proximity to where this bridge was being constructed. So in 1936, almost 100 years ago, they abandoned the bridge. And today, people will take a hike. It's a very common hike in the Los Angeles area to hike what's called the Bridge to Nowhere. The Bridge to Nowhere. They never finished the roads. The road never went through the mountain. And for almost 100 years, there's been a bridge that connects nothing to nothing. There's nothing on this side. There's nothing on this side. It's an 8-mile hike if you want to go and see this bridge, because that's the closest road is about 8 miles away. And you get to the bridge and there's just nothing. It's called the Bridge to Nowhere. And here's what Moses realized. That if in this life, if I've got everything that I wanted, I've got every victory secured, I've got every possession that I could ever want, I've got all the things, but I don't have Jesus, that's a bridge to nowhere that I'm not willing to cross. Moses says, I'd rather stay here in the desert than go to the land of milk and honey without you. Moses prays simply, fervently, personally. So Moses appeals. He would not go alone. Here we find a great picture that Jesus, who enjoyed the presence of God, was not willing that we should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Moses is a great picture here of Jesus. He's making intercession on behalf of the people. Verse number 16, for wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from the people that are on the face of the earth. Here's what Moses says, and this is a great observation. God, how can we be called God's people? How can we be your people if you're not with us? We need you. He makes intercession. He prays on behalf of the people. I think someone asked me last night, thinking of following Jesus, what do you do next? What do I have to do to be a completely sold out Christian? It's pretty simple, but it takes a lifetime. You look to Jesus. Jesus was our perfect example. We pattern our life after him. And every good character trait that we find here in Moses, we find better in Jesus. And Moses is making intercession for his people, and Jesus did the same. So let's wrap it up here. How does this story end? Look at verse number 18. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. Show me thy glory. This is the greatest petition from man to God. Show me your glory. Now, guys, give me 2 more minutes and we'll be done. I want you to think about this request. Show me your glory. In Exodus chapter number 24, God tells Moses earlier, no one sees me and lives. Jacob, he wrestled with God, but this was most likely pre-incarnate Christ. Isaiah, he had a vision of God. Here's what Moses requests. I want to see your glory. He wants to know your ways. I want to know how you operate. And I want to see, think of our theme this week at camp. I just want to see more. I want to see more. I'm not content in what I know right now. I want to know more. I want to see, God, I want to see what makes you, you. So how does God respond? Let's read these last few verses and we'll be done. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken. For thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And he said, and thou canst not see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me. Thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of a rock, and I will cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I will take my hand away, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face thou shalt not be seen. So here's what God says. And we're done. I want you to get a picture of this. Moses says, God, I want to see your glory. I want to see how you work. I want to see how you operate. And I want to see you. What a bold request. God says, you can't see me. No man sees me and lives. I'm that holy and I'm that special. But here's what you'll see. I'll let you see a glimpse. God says, I'm going to pass by and I'm going to hide you from my glory because you can't handle it. But as I go by, and he says, my back parts, what he's speaking of is like, think of a king in his robe, the train. This is what God is alluding to. I'm going to let you see the train of my glory. I'm going to let you catch a small glimpse of it because you can't see all of me. And this is a tension in Scripture until Jesus, that we can't live with God, but we can't live without Him. That is unresolved until Jesus came, God in the flesh. And what does He say here? I will make all my goodness pass before thee. This is the point I want to leave you with this morning. That when Moses says, God, I want to see your glory, what's the first thing that God says to Moses? I will make my goodness pass before thee. You want to know more of God? You want to catch a glimpse of His glory? If God could summarize His glory in just one little glimpse, it's that He is good. He's more than that, but above all, He's good. Spurgeon said, the old preacher, God's greatest glory is that He is good. The brightest gem in the glory of God is His goodness. Some of you might be on the fence. I know some of you are in a valley of decision. And you're not sure if you, like Moses, even care to see the glory of God. Maybe you don't have that appetite right now that Moses had. It inspires us. I want to be like that. I want more. God is unsearchable and we never come to the end of Him. So remember this morning, that God is good. He is good to us in that He has revealed Himself to us through creation, through His Word, through Jesus. He's good to us in the sense that He sent Jesus to the cross to die for our sins, to pay the penalty of our sins so we can have a home in heaven with Him. I will make my goodness to pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy.